Welcome to the Binge Eating to Food Freedom podcast for driven hearts and minds. If you pour your best self into everything you do, and yet food takes up so much energy that it pulls you away from what matters most, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Papo, and I'm here to help you create a healthy relationship with food that supports you to live your highest and best life. And for an extra edge, become a food freedom insider. Each week, I'll give you free, practical wisdom you can actually use in your daily life and more. Just head to katiepapo.com/resources or check the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode, and I'm really excited to share today's episode with you because what I'll be talking about was the single most important lesson that I personally had to learn in order to embark on a new path that ultimately ended my binge eating and compulsive eating completely. So for a large part of my adult life, I considered myself addicted to food, and I definitely was binging on a regular basis. And if I hadn't learned what I'm about to share with you today, I don't think I ever would have stopped. So buckle in. And this is especially for people who have been chronically dieting. So maybe you've tried every diet under the sun, or maybe you're somebody who used to diet and now you kind of just take what you've learned from those diets and you try to create your own plan and food rules to stick to. This will still apply to you too. And this is definitely for anyone thinking about starting a diet soon. So I'm setting the intention to give you exactly what you need to hear. And that by the time you leave this episode, you will have heard what you've needed to hear, just like I did when I learned this lesson. So let's talk about your brain the instant you start a diet. And I would actually like to even correct that to what happens to your brain even before you've actually started the diet, but you've just decided to start a diet, or you're thinking about starting a diet, because that's actually how powerful this is. So let's think about that little before period, before the diet. What I would usually do is I'd first of all get really excited because I loved the idea of fresh starts. I love the idea of starting fresh on a Monday and having this clean slate and this idea that I would be this new person. And I think that's an attractive quality to a lot of people, especially those of us who really like the idea of personal growth and who love the idea of change and letting go of the things that don't serve us. So already diets are very attractive for that reason, because what they promise is a new clean slate where all of your vices will be gone, and you'll have this new plan where if you follow it, you'll succeed for your goals. So that's the first thing that's very attractive about a diet. And then the second thing that's attractive about a diet, especially for those of us who are highly ambitious, who tend to have more type A personalities, we love structure. We love feeling in control. We feel in control when things are organized and we have a plan, because we have faith in our own ability to execute that plan. We might have done this in college, we might have done this in our careers, or how we run a household. We feel best when things are organized and in control. So if we're promised a structure in a diet and a plan, and all we have to do is follow that plan, that's very appealing to someone with our type of personality. Not only that, but once we actually start the diet, the promise is we don't have to think about food anymore, which is also very appealing because we don't want to be spending all of our time thinking about food. We want to be spending it on our ambitions. We want to be spending it on the things that are meaningful and significant in our lives, such as our family, career, passions. So all of the promises of a diet are very attractive, especially to people like us who are like, give it to me, I'll get it done. So this was me, and I definitely felt attracted also to the idea of having these very clear black and white food rules where there was no wiggle room, like the stricter the better for me, because then there wasn't as much chance that I could fall off the wagon or get off track because it was so clear. However, for those of us who have dieted and now we're listening to this podcast, we know that the story of what actually happens in a diet is very different than what the promise is. So here's what I want to outline actually happens so we can start to see what the brain does the instant that we start a diet or even before we start the diet and why. This is the lesson that changed everything for me. And without this lesson, I don't think I would have moved forward on any kind of new path that actually worked. And before actually I say any of this, I want to lay an understood foundation here that the mind and the body are always connected. You've probably heard that said in the wellness space before, the mind-body connection. It's not just some woo-woo thing. This has been scientifically founded that the body and the mind are very connected. And what that means is when the body is going through something, it affects the mind directly. And when the mind is going through something, it affects the body directly. And this is what's happening in dieting as well. And I'll explain as we go. But I want to just give you a very simple, short example. Let's say I'm in my car. So it's a very controlled environment. Nothing's going around me. I'm alone. And so I'm driving in my car and I start to recall a loved one of mine who had passed away, and I feel overcome by grief and I start crying out of response to that. So what just happened? Nothing physical happened. No one died while I was in the car. I wasn't even with anyone. Nothing in my outer environment changed. What happened is my mind recalled an event, and then my body had a physical reaction of crying. So this kind of thing happens all the time. I'll give you just one more example before moving on, just to hammer this home. Let's say you're at home and you're on your couch, very safe. You've got some snacks around you. You've got your partner around you. Everything's safe, but you're watching a horror movie. Now, while you're watching the horror movie, your muscles are clenched. You're on the edge of your seat. You're holding your breath, right? And you're experiencing the physiological feeling of fear, even though intellectually you know you are in a safe place and nothing is happening to you. So these are just examples to show that even if something's not real, your body can still have a reaction as if it is real. So just laying that as a baseline understanding. Now let's move on to your brain the instant you start a diet. When you're anticipating starting a diet, so even before you've started, when you're anticipating, something's already happening in your brain and in your body. And what happens first, so let's just go through it in, let's say, in real time, right? It's Sunday night, you're starting your diet on a Monday. So you spent the whole day Sunday cleaning out the cabinets, you're downloading the apps that you need, you've got your spreadsheets organized, you've got your little labeled Tupperwares and measuring cups organized, you've got everything that you need ready for your diet. Now, the night before, you're anticipating that starting tomorrow, I'm not allowed to have these forbidden foods. You're not allowed to have, let's say, carbs or sugar or, the basic ones that are popular now in today's kinds of diets. So you're not allowed to have any of these things. You're only allowed to have certain things, and you have to have certain amounts of those, the green light foods, let's call them. So you already have this idea that starting tomorrow, you can have this, but you cannot have this. There are certain things that are forbidden. So how many of you, and I'm going to raise my hand for this, were anticipating going on a diet on Monday, so you had a huge binge on Sunday of all of the things that you couldn't have. Have you had that experience? So, this is what I call the restriction brain effect. When your brain anticipates restriction, it will want to compensate in advance for that restriction. And this is not unique to us, people who have been on diets or people even with our personality types. This is a very natural thing. Even just think about bears hibernating for the winter, right? There's less food in the winter. So they basically binge eat a bunch of berries before the winter. That way they are protecting themselves, right? The bears don't say, oh, I can't believe I ate all those berries, right? This is a positive thing because it's a protective survival mechanism. This is how they survive the winter. Our bodies have that same mechanism, but the difference is our body doesn't know the difference between really needing to protect ourselves and just that we're perceiving that we need to protect ourselves and go through this basically anti-starvation protocol. So when we go on a diet, these survival alarms light up, or even if we're anticipating a diet, the survival alarms light up, and the brain will start to generate obsessive thoughts about the forbidden food, so we'll eat as much of it as we can. And this is unique to food because we actually do need food to survive. This is why I won't talk about it in this episode, but this is why when I talk about food addiction, I treat it very differently than I would treat drug addiction or alcohol addiction, for example. Food addiction, I would say, treat this differently, but I'll save that for another episode. So your body sends off these alarms saying survival mode, survival mode. It will generate more obsession around the food and more intensified cravings. And then, of course, we know the ending of that story is we'll feel the cravings come, right? We'll exert as much willpower as we can. Maybe in our first diet, we were able to go the full 30 days or the full 6 months or whatever the diet was. But then at some point, we will relapse and we will have a binge. And it has been found and shown very conclusively that the number one cause of binges is restriction. I'm going to repeat that. The number one cause of binges is restriction. Why? For the reason I just said. The body or the brain and the body will start to work together to get you to eat as much as you can when it perceives that it's in a situation that challenges its survival. So as a protective mechanism, it will try to force you to eat. And that's why you'll feel much more intense cravings, maybe at the end of a diet, or it depends on how many diets you've done. I found that for most of us, when we've done our first diet, we were very gung-ho. We took it really seriously. Then eventually we fell off the wagon. And then when we go on the next diet, we might be a little, gung-ho, but we already failed the first one. So there's already that seed of doubt in our mind of whether or not we're going to be able to stick with it. And then the more diets we do after that and fail, the less seriously we even take them in the beginning, even though we really want to. But if we've seen that we have this big history of failure, it's hard to really have full faith that this time will truly be different. But because we're the kind of people who never give up and who are super committed to everything, of course we're going to try, right? We're going to still do our best and try to have all the willpower and all the motivation and all the support in order to succeed at the diet. So this is, I would say, one of the biggest downsides where it's positive everywhere else, but it's one of the downsides of having such an ambitious personality when we are attracted to diets, because then we stick to something that's actively creating the problem that we have. I've given this analogy before. This is like If you have this big fire that you need to put out, you want to pour water on the fire. But let's say someone gives you gasoline and you think that it's water. So you start pouring gasoline on the fire, and then the fire's just getting more and more out of control. So you're like, oh my God, I need even more water. But not knowing it, you just take more gasoline, and before you know it, the fire is out of control and totally consuming you. This is exactly what happens when we keep doing the diets because we're so committed to finally doing it right this time and sticking to it. The diet is what's actually causing the cravings. It's what's actually causing the binge eating. For every restriction, there's an equal and opposite binge just waiting for you. So the more we pour that gasoline on, the more we restrict, the more we diet, the more we're actually training ourselves to crave, to binge again and again. And this is just the brain. But the brain is also connected to the body, and the body has also very undesirable effects that if I hadn't learned about this, I don't think I ever would have thought to really change what I was doing. So what happens with the body is when we go on a diet, and this is, I want to just preface this by saying there's been a lot of studies on this for a very long time. So if I say a number, consider that number in the range, but I'm aware that there are many, many studies, just so you know. So it's been found that 95 to 99% of people who go on diets gain the weight back. And then a large percentage of those people gain the weight back plus more. Isn't that a huge percentage of people? That is the vast majority of people. 95 to 99% of people who go on restrictive diets gain the weight back, and a big portion of those people gain the weight back plus more. Now, why would this be the case? Because for that large number of people, I don't know if we could just chalk that up to like personality types, or chalk it up to something like laziness, or that, oh, just magically every restrictive diet doesn't work. Why wouldn't it work? We need to look at what could be a universal reason why. Well, when we go on a restrictive diet, what happens is the body doesn't know that we're doing that on purpose. All the body knows is that it's in a threatened situation and it needs to adjust itself to protect you for your survival. So what will the body naturally do if it worries that you might be starving, or at the start of being starving? What will the body do to protect you? Number one, it will slow down the metabolism. Number two, it will hold on to fat and make it much harder for you to lose fat. And number three, it will make it much easier for you to gain weight. So that way, everything you eat, it will be like, yes, give me that. I want to keep that just in case. So make it easier to gain weight, harder to lose weight. Now, I've personally experienced this myself, especially when I was going through all those phases of different diets and just putting myself on all these different food rules. I found that my weight fluctuated a lot, whereas it doesn't anymore. Now that I've graduated from that way of being, I don't struggle with this the way I did. So, and now I'm a decade older. So it's not that my age has been a benefit. And if anything, my age would make it worse. But the fluctuations were happening when I was at the height of all of my dieting and restricting mindset. And when I would try to stick to these food rules, what would happen was it felt like if I ate just one cheat meal, I would gain like 3 to 5 pounds. And sometimes I would see that on the scale, but I just felt so much bigger just from that one meal. And I would think, why, if in that one meal do I feel so much heavier? And I would also have to eat so much less in order to still lose weight, where it felt like I was barely eating anything and I still couldn't lose weight. And I was like, how can I even eat much less than this? And this is what happens to people who are chronically dieting. You might have heard of Bob Schwartz, who wrote the book Diets Don't Work. And he did a little experiment because he noticed what most people were ignoring, that at the end of a diet, people would weigh more, not less, right? They might lose weight initially, but the ending of the story was they'd always gain weight. So what he wanted to do was put people who were too thin on a diet to help them gain weight. Isn't that wild? And he did warn them before he did it. He said, if you do this, you might not be able to stop gaining weight. And that was what happened. And then there's another example I thought I'd mention, and I'm very against animal testing, so I will say what happened, but just know that I'm very sad to say that this was studied on rats. But there was a group of rats that were just fed regularly, and then there was a group of rats that had restricted diets. So they were starved. And the starved rats, or the restricted food rats, ended up gaining 18 times more weight than the rats who just ate regularly. That's wild. Can we think about that for a second? They gained 18 times more weight. That's tremendous. And this is what I see all the time. When we diet or we perceive restriction around food, the brain has this reaction, this psychological reaction to create more cravings, and we binge. And number two, there's the biological or physiological piece where the body will actually make a point of trying to gain weight during that time. So dieting is actually training us to binge and to gain weight. It's training the mind to want to binge, and dieting is training the body to gain weight. This is one of the most important realizations to have, because if we want to shift to another path, which is what I'm going to go into next, and what I go into much more deeply in other podcast episodes and my courses and things like that, if we want to shift into a new path, we have to leave the dieting behind, because just the anticipation of dieting, as you can see, is going to cause binge urges, cravings, and weight gain. That makes sense? That's why when I learned this, it was life-changing for me, because it finally gave me permission to let dieting go. Whereas I had trained my brain for so long to think that if I'm being good, that means I'm on the diet, and when I'm being bad, I'm off the diet. So it was kind of a brain warp to think, oh, well, the dieting is actually causing all the things that I'm trying to fix. And if we don't recognize this, we will forever stay in this cycle. So I needed to understand this in my bones in order to let the dieting go, because having tried to stick with them for so long, and also being the kind of person, which I know you are too, who just doesn't give up on themselves and doesn't give up on things, I never wanted to feel like I was giving up. I wanted to finally succeed. But in order to succeed, I needed to choose a different strategy, because I knew that the diet was only perpetuating my failure. And it wasn't my failure. It wasn't a personal thing at all. Turns out that this happens to all people and all animals. Even non-human animals still experience the same things that we do. You can now let it go and put it behind you and shift your attention to a new path, knowing that this is not you giving up, and this is not you letting go of the results that you actually want. This is you pivoting to a better strategy that will actually work for you, as opposed to one that not only doesn't not work, but it's actively harming you. So what do we actually pivot to? I only can really have time to describe this for a few minutes, because this episode I really wanted to focus on your brain and your body when you start the diet. But know that in other episodes, I go much deeper into the solution piece, and I go much deeper also in my courses into the solution piece. But let me break down the solution steps for you, just so you have a baseline. Instead of dieting and instead of restricting, number one, we need to reset our whole nervous system. So our body is no longer in the survival mode, and we're no longer generating these compulsive feelings or cravings towards food. That's the first step, is we have to reset the nervous system to get rid of the compulsion. And the compulsion comes from the restriction. It comes from the scarcity. So if I tell myself I can't have something and I feel deprived, that's going to make me want it more. So we throw away that whole, plan that we were doing before. And now we focus on resetting the nervous system so we don't have to deal with the compulsion anymore. We don't have the urge to binge anymore. Then from that point, we have an opening, let's call it, where now we can build trust with our body and work with our body's natural wisdom, which it does have. We've just been overriding it with dieting, but it does have it, instead of trying to just control it through certain strict food rules. We learn to tune into the body, to its natural rhythms and natural wisdom, so that way we can work with our hunger signals and our fullness signals. The body will be able to digest better. The metabolism will start to repair itself. You won't have an injured metabolism forever. And the body will just start to adjust to this idea of, okay, I'm starting to relax. I'm not in the survival mode anymore. It's safe for me to burn fat. It's safe for me to have a faster metabolism, and it will start to make adjustments to itself. Then we start to work with the mind, and the mind has a history of dieting, right? So we start to rewire the mind and to rewire those patterns where those old foods that used to be very triggering for us, where we felt like I can't have that food in the house because I can't trust myself, we start to rewire those patterns. So now the mind, the body, we're all on the same page. We're all working together for your optimal health and well-being and peace. And then we work on ingraining this so it becomes your natural way of being. So we start with all of these individual steps of calming the nervous system so that way your body's not in survival. Now we listen to the body and we work with it instead of against it for our optimal health, which will be much easier because it actually works with you instead of against you. This is what you were born with. You probably don't remember, but what every baby is born with is our natural signals. We cry when we're hungry, when we want to be fed. We let our parents know. We send out that signal. So we are very in tune. It's just that when we're on the diet, we're overriding our actual body signals constantly because we're trying to stick to the plan. So this is like a reconnection. It's not actually that you have to create this whole new way of being. It's actually reconnecting with how you naturally already are, but have just been disconnected from. So then the final result of this is you're transforming your relationship with food and with your body as like a partnership. Food is something that serves you, not something to be afraid of. And your body, you understand how it works now, and you want to create an environment where your body feels very safe, where it feels safe to let go of fat that it doesn't need, where it feels safe that it's not going to be starved, it's not going into the survival mode. That's when the body's going to work the best. Even if you think about, I've been in some roles when I was younger. I had some jobs where I had like managers who were like micromanagers, and they were always trying to control every little stupid thing. And it would drive me nuts. And I would actually perform much worse than if they just told me the outcome that they needed and just let me do it on my own. And this is actually how the body works too. When you give the body just what it needs to thrive, the body will take care of pretty much everything on its own. But when you try to micromanage every single calorie and all these things, the body will have a rebellion. So your relationship with your body will become a lot more trusting, and the trust will go both ways. Not only will you learn to trust your body, but your body will also learn to trust you. So it won't be trying to constantly protect itself from what you're doing. And when the trust goes both ways, that's when you'll have a harmonious relationship. Just like any relationship with a partner, with a friend, when the trust goes both ways, that's when the friendship or the partnership can flourish. And it's the same exact thing for your body. So I hope that makes sense. And I look forward to seeing you on the podcast next week. I would love to hear what resonated with you in this episode. And for more practical tips and wisdom as to how to actually make the shift away from dieting into this more natural way of eating that really suits your mind and suits your body, I invite you to sign up for my email list, because that's where I'm going to send out more practical tips and wisdom every week. So I'll see you next time. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for spending time with me today. If you're ready to take the next step in your journey, become a food freedom insider at katiepapo.com/resources. You'll get free practical guidance and instant access to my foundations class. That's katiepapo.com/resources. New podcast episodes come out every week, so subscribe to the podcast now. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a kind review. It's very meaningful to me, and it helps other people find freedom too. I appreciate you so much, and I hope to help you further on your journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and others. See you next week.